How do you make sure that your PBL units aren't creating carbon copy end products? This is a need to know that came from Drew in Kentucky. He went to pblshare.com. That's pblshare.com, and you can share a win or you can get a need to know. And I'm going to share it on the podcast or on YouTube. So Drew has a really pretty interesting situation at his school where he's combined several different classes. He's realized that project-based learning is likely the answer to differentiating for his learners and being able to engage all of his content in the time that he's been given. It's a pretty challenging situation. And if you go to PBL Share and you put a need to know in there, pblshare.com, Drew got a very intricate answer to his response via email. I'm going to respond to each one via email, and then it also could very likely make it on the podcast like Drew's did. Now, the overarching question that we're going to answer is, how do you make sure that you're not creating a situation that creates carbon copy end products at your presentation? So now you're watching, these 30, 50, maybe even 100 presentations with your authentic audience in there, and they're all exactly the same. In 1829, in 1829, in 1829, and you realize that this is happening at about number 25, and you know that you've got 75 more of these, and you're like, I should have seen this in practice presentations, which you should have. But it's not super easy to solve, right? So there are some pieces that we're going to talk about here to give you some end products that allow you to have some flexibility in what your learners are creating. So when I answered Drew in this question, how do I make sure I don't have carbon copy presentations at the end, there's a couple different things that you want to look at. One, you want to make sure that your driving question is open. It's a big umbrella that your learners can really answer. So you might have something like this. How can we as architects create the most inviting and accessible playground so that all learners feel welcome? Right? That's a real driving question that one of our model schools has, and it allowed their elementary learners to create all kinds of different playgrounds. They went out and saw different playgrounds. They went and saw their playground. They thought about different learners, and they all came up with different solutions. In the end, they ended up choosing one of these solutions, or maybe it was the architect, I think, came and looked at all their solutions, and then they actually brought that playground to their school. So the learners were a part of that. Like, how empowering is that? It's great. But all the learners were creating playgrounds that were just a little bit different. They had a different reason why they were creating these different end products, these different playgrounds in this case. So you also might want to, and this is where we're going to go today, is you really want to look at end products. Like, how can you create a process where you have different end products and that you can give your learners some choice? So if you are listening to the podcast, I'm going to be super descriptive so that you can hear these different end products, but you also might want to scoot on over to YouTube where I've got some slides that I'll put up on the screen so that you can see them as well, because we actually have an end products guide, which we will link to the podcast show notes, and we'll also put in the description of the YouTube video as well. So we want to give you a process where you are not just struggling for an end product, but you actually have a plethora of options for your end product. So how do you pick an end product? Great question. Here's some goals. You want to make sure that you're going to demonstrate student understanding and mastery of the task. So you've probably taken a lot of your grades already by the time you get to presentation time. You know that your learners have mastered content or where they're at on that scale. They're moving towards mastery. And now they're using that mastery to create this thing, this end product. It might be, really any number of things. We can probably scoot to that right away. Let me give you just some options. Some options are, they could be written products. So it might be a research report. It might be a letter, a brochure, it could be a script, could also be presentation products. So maybe it's a speech or a debate or a mock trial or a play. Could be a planning product. Maybe they're going to plan out a green business plan. Maybe it's going to be a proposal, a bid. It could be something they create. Maybe it's a small scale model. Maybe it's a consumer product. Maybe it's an invention. It could be media tech related. So maybe it's a slideshow, drawing, graphic design, collage. And when you go to the link that we're going to put in the show notes or the description, you're going to have this list, right? So I want you to have a list. We want you to have a list to choose from, and you're going to have your own things too, right? Like, you're going to be creative and you're going to have things that work specifically for you. But what I really want you to do is, I don't want you to be locked into a particular end product. I want you to have chosen from this large list, and that way you've got kind of the best end product. Or what I think we're doing here in answering our need to know for today is how do you make sure you don't have carbon copies? How about some choice? Right? How about some choice in how your learners are showing their mastery through their end product? So, depending on the expertise of your learners, like again, that might mean age level, it might mean how long they've been in PBL. They might be their first time they're in a PBL classroom. So if you give them 7 choices, they're just going to freeze up. Whereas, a junior, senior in high school that's been in a K-12 PBL environment, they have no problem with that. So you want to find a choice model that works for your learners and for you, in fact. So you want to be able to display student research and inquiry. These are goals of an end product. You want to serve as an authentic product with a clear purpose, meaning it has a purpose other than like just showing that they learned some stuff, right? Like it fulfills a purpose. Maybe it helps them, portray their argument in a debate, or it shows that they have taken their learning and they've gone from surface level to deep to transfer. They're now transferring their knowledge into something they've created. And of course, you want to make sure that it aligns to the standards in this assessment criteria. Here are some questions that you want to ask yourself when you're looking at end product. What do you want your students to create, right? Is it going to be the same product with the same focus, the same product with a different focus, different products with the same focus, different products with a different focus? So we've got an article that I'll link in this presentation. And what you're trying to do here is you're really trying to figure out, why are you choosing this end product? Yes, you want variety. So you want to have different end products throughout the year. You just don't want to do an expo every time at the end of a presentation. So you want to have different end products that you're using, but you also don't want to just pick a different one to be different, right? You want to make sure that it relates to the PBL unit that you are working through. So again, types of end products, there are a lot of different types. You can brainstorm with your team, but we've also got some resources that we're going to link in here so that you've got some ideas for that, because they could create a podcast, a PSA, they could create a website. Again, don't make a website just to make a website. And can I just put a little asterisk here too, that when you have a website or a blog, it does not mean that 30 million people have read it. Is it possible for 30 million people to access it? Yes, it is, because it's on the internet, but it's in a very, very small, tiny corner. Unless you've got some major SEO street cred that puts you on the front page, it's unlikely that the random person is going to find it, right, to be able to comment on your blog. Now, you can jump in there and you can be intentional and say, hey, 6th grade class in New Mexico, while you're a 6th grade class in New Jersey, would you guys like to comment on each other's blogs, right? And now you've got a blog that's out there that other people are going to read. That feels a little more authentic. But just because it's a blog doesn't mean that it's real world, right? So you do want to check some of those things, make sure that your end product fits. So what makes a good end product? In short, there's no easy answer here. It depends, right? Because there are endless end products that your students can create. So the keys to a quality end product are that you want to make sure that it's authentic, that it matches the learning and the exploration, the inquiry that your learners are into. It demonstrates student mastery of content and skills that you've taught. So you're not really assessing these content standards within the end product, possibly. I suppose you could. But in the final presentation, you want to be careful to not have the Godzilla rubric, is what I'm warning you of right here. You really want to say, hey, you've learned these content pieces throughout our PBL unit, and wow, look at this thing you've created. You want to make sure that your end product aligns the standards and assessment criteria on your rubric that you'll have. And you might want to consider Bloom's taxonomy or different levels of knowledge like surface, deep, and transfer. Authenticity, you know that at Magnify Learning, like we are huge on authenticity. We want to have real world PBL units that our learners are out solving these problems. We really don't want scenario PBL units where you're just pretending to do something cool. We want you to go out and do the work, and we want the standards to be the vehicle that you need to learn through in order to do this work. Right? So authenticity is a big deal. So we define that as adults in the real world are likely to tackle the same problem that you're addressing in the project, that the problem of driving question has meaning to the students, and you have some kind of an external audience for the student work, which again is why I tend to be a little leery of the blog scenario of like, hey, 20 million people could see this. But probably not. Like we were really hard to get these blogs out to you, and it is hard to get things out through the internet. There are a lot of things out there. So you want to make sure that there is an external audience that is going to be able to see the end products and give feedback and really provide that empowerment to your learners. There's this kind of step up that happens when an authentic audience is going to be looking at these end products. And again, the authentic audience is not going to be giving a content grade, but they certainly can give feedback on the quality of the presentation, quality of the end product. They can give suggestions for next time, right? There's a lot of things that your community partner can do. And just being there is a huge step, right? Just the fact that they're there, but then they can also give feedback. So another bullet point that we want to throw in here is that your end product is going to demonstrate student mastery of the content and skills. So we've kind of talked about this before, but it's worth its own slide. This idea that you don't want to have a whole bunch of learning over here on the left and then suddenly whoop, your end product is over on the right. And it's like, well, how do these really connect, right? The ideal end product is they're both going to connect. Now, have I had some end products that didn't quite align? Yeah, sure I have. They didn't fully, match up, but you want to keep striving. You want that growth mindset to keep getting better. So you want your students to be creating something that requires them to learn and apply the content and skills that you are teaching them. So sometimes I look at like your content is like a hurdle and they have to get over the hurdle to get a solid end product, right? They have to engage, uncover your standards so that they can create a really great end product. And one thing you want to be careful of is as you're looking at these end products, is it really flashy and it's got glitter and it's fancy and the Google Slides all rotate, but the content isn't solid, right? You've seen that, haven't you? I've definitely seen that. Like, wow, you have a lot of transitions and not a lot of content. And sometimes you need to be aware of the other. Like maybe it's somebody who's not super creative when it comes to the Google Slides and the transitions and all the Pixabay pictures and all those pieces, but they really know the content. And you want to make sure that you acknowledge that as well. So we have some examples of end products that, again, will connect right here in this slide deck that you'll be able to access, whether you're listening to it on the podcast or on YouTube. If you are listening on the podcast, would you take a moment and leave a review? It makes a really big deal when there's more reviews on those podcasts, more people are likely to jump in. And if you're on YouTube, you've heard it before, but you need to smash the like button and hit subscribe. It really does help the algorithm to get this information out to more and more people. And remember, you are part of the movement. You are part of a PBL movement. You are a movement maker. By 2051, we want 51% of schools using project-based learning. And that doesn't happen by accident, my friends. It happens with a movement, it happens on purpose. So you probably are going to have some kind of a rubric for your end product. And as you do that, you want to be mindful. I always say you don't want to spend too much time on the rubric. You don't want to spend, 48 hours on this rubric, but you want to be able to communicate, and you want to be able to communicate as clearly as you can. And there may be some things that aren't in the rubric. Maybe it's a checklist, and that's okay, right? There are things that need to happen in this end product. There might just be some checklist things that have to happen. We've got a couple different examples here of rubrics, and we've got examples for elementary, middle school, and high. Rubrics are, again, I think they're more for communication tools. Like obviously we've got to give grades, but a lot of these grades are coming as you're mastering the content throughout the PBL unit before the actual presentation. Should be the majority of that individual grade. So the rubric's really there to guide your learners, to help them see like what is a really high quality end product look like. And as you're making that rubric, if you're trying to give your learners options, you want to make sure that that rubric is a little more universal for all those options, right? If you're going to give 7 different options for an end product, you probably don't want 7 different rubrics that you're going to have to grade off of, right? So be cognizant as you're building that rubric that you want it to be able to hit multiple end products. So your learners really can pick whatever they feel like best fits their presentation style. So what's the next step? How do you create a PBL unit where at the end products are not all carbon copy? So again, you're going to think about that driving question. You're going to make sure that it fits your content area. You're going to make sure it's not Googleable. You're going to make sure that it's not chat GPTable. You're going to make sure that it's open-ended enough that every group or every individual can have different answers to that driving question through their end product. And that is going to start to kind of divide these carbon copy end products into individualized end products. You are going to give some choice in your end products, right? So we've got a brainstorming sheet that I already put up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Again, it'll be linked in the presentation. So if you're in the podcast, don't worry, you're not missing it, but you are going to have to remember to come back and grab it after you're done driving. So there's an end product brainstorming sheet on there. We're going to give you a whole list of possible end products. Is this the only list of end products? Of course not, right? You can come up with all kinds of different ideas, but if you want a place to start, it's a really great one, right? These are all end products that have been used in the past successfully. Now, I love having learners, this is a quote from my book, I love having learners present to authentic audiences of community members. It raises the bar for learners and gives them a chance to shine in front of professionals who don't know the great things that are happening in your classroom. When you bring community partners into your classroom, amazing things happen. The first the first one that I think happens is that most of these community partners think you're doing school normally. They think it's the same thing that was happening in your school 30 years ago, and it's not, right? It's not. It is different. And when you show them, they are blown away. They're blown away by what your learners do. Now, is every end product going to be awesome? No, right? Or some are going to be super sparkly and have no content. Some are going to be sparkly and be awesome with content. Some are not going to be awesome. That's okay. Like community partners know that. They're not expecting perfection. They're expecting growth and they're expecting to help out, right? So don't be ashamed of those three projects that were end products that were just awful. Like that's a thing. It's a teaching moment, right? And allow your community partners to speak into that and give some careful feedback that those learners can hear and hopefully step up their game the next time. Now, this has been a talk all about the idea of how do we make sure we don't have carbon copy end products. So I gave you a whole bunch of examples. If you want more, you can actually download my book PBL Simplified for free. You can get the ebook version absolutely for free. It comes right from the publisher. You can put it right into your Kindle or however it is that you read your ebook. So grab that. It's on the screen if you're on YouTube. It's in the presentation if it's YouTube or podcast, whatever you got. It's the very last slide, and you can get my book absolutely free. And you can download it. I would love to hear what you think about it. So if you've got questions or comments, you can go to pblshare.com. Remember, that's what started this entire episode was Drew reached out and said, hey, what do I do? Right? What do I do? And he's thinking critically, he's passionate, he's excited, but sometimes we just need to ask a question. Now, if you want more videos like this or another podcast like this, you can check out the link that you're about to see on the screen for YouTube, and you can see how to make sure that your public presentations are